Hi everyone, I'm Pari. Welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essential. Hello Eddie, how are you?
I'm doing great, Perry. I hope you are as well. I hope it's kind of easing into kind of the summer months, right? So, well, it's not officially summer, but we're getting close, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of look forward to that.
So everything is getting back to normal here. I don't know there.
Yeah, you're probably closer to back to normal than we are in the States, but we're
Mm-hmm.
getting there, and some states are really almost open without restriction, particularly in the Midwest of the country, places where there haven't been a great many virus cases or deaths. And then other states, they've opened up, but now it looks like they've got more cases. And so the next month will be interesting. I think it'll be interesting for the whole world, right, to see what happens when you try to open back up. And I just sort of hope and pray for everybody that we have enough understanding to protect as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. So people still have to wear masks everywhere to go when they go out.
You know, it's interesting. There are Americans that they don't want to wear the mask almost to the point where they find it offensive.
Mhm.
They feel like it impedes their constitutional rights. I don't feel that way because I feel like by wearing the mask, I'm protecting someone else if I happen to have it. You know, if I were to sneeze or cough, I'd just feel horrible if somehow I contributed to someone getting sick, particularly an older person, right? So it's a choice I'm happy to make. And some businesses, like I got a haircut today, my first haircut in a couple
Congratulations.
months. Was happy to do that. And the rule where I live in North Carolina was the guy that cut my hair and I had to both wear a mask. And they did a temperature check and did some safety precautions. And so I think it's a good idea to be cautious. Other people don't, they don't see it that way. I'm not going to argue with them. Everybody's got their own individual choices to make, but I really feel like wearing the mask is just, might help someone.
Mhm.
It's no
Yeah.
guarantee. Probably doesn't provide me much protection. It's mostly what it offers other people if I sneeze or cough. So.
Okay, right. Eddie, today we have a very interesting subject to talk about how to curb the sugar addiction. I think many people have to go through this, not even me. Very difficult.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, and the reason I said, or the reason I thought let's take this subject on, is because you're hearing a lot of people talk about they gained COVID. It's called COVID-19.
Yes.
They're saying they gained a COVID-19. They gained 19 pounds. I don't know if that's exactly true, but they've just talked about that during the quarantine, just because people weren't at their gyms, not as active. Perhaps snacking or baking. There's a big craze of baking bread right now. At one point in the U.S., it was hard to find yeast, so people clearly doing a lot of baking and things. And then invariably, though, when people do overeat in stressful situations like this, they tend to eat a lot of sugar. It's almost comforting food. But the truth is, and for some listening, they may not want to hear this, but aside from, say, canola oil,
Mhm.
which canola oil is GMO. We've talked about it before. Just not good for your body. Really creates inflammation. It's just not a good product for humans to consume. Probably the second worst thing you can consume, sort of in this same idea, is sugar. And we consume a lot of sugar.
Yes.
Uh, Most people, eat way too much. And I think the average estimation is approximately 77 to say 80 grams of sugar a day. Now that does not include fruits or vegetables. And to give you an idea, that's 19 or so teaspoons of sugar. So that's a lot, right? And that's just the average, because if you take someone that's drinking a couple of, say, regular soft drinks a day, just in their soft drinks, they're probably pushing 90 to I don't know, maybe as much as 100 grams of sugar. If you take one of these 20-ounce, say, I don't want to pick on a brand, one of these sugary energy drinks that you see that are so popular out there, in 20 ounces, those can have as much as 105 to 110 grams of sugar. So not only does that make them high in calorie, there's other aspects of that that aren't good for you. And to give folks an idea, a gram of sugar is approximately 4 calories. So, it adds up really fast and contribute to making people fat. In fact, some of the problems with sugar include obesity. We have a real problem with that in the States, and really most of the developed world has a real problem with obesity as defined by every sort of major medical organization in the world. In fact, most of the observations are that at least a third to maybe as much as 40 to 45% of the developed world population fits in the obese category. About half of those people fit into the morbidly obese category. And so those are all things that sugar contributes to adult onset diabetes, which is sometimes referred to as type 2 diabetes. And now, because what happens is kids eat at the same table as their parents, right? They watch what their parents eat. They adopt the same habits. And so what used to be adult onset type 2 diabetes, which can be controlled with a drug, but you can also help to control it with diet and exercise. Now kids are getting it. Adolescents, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. If you go to, like an amusement park and you look at the number of kids walking around that are just obese, it's terrible. And, once those habits start, it's more difficult to control the weight. And so it's not good. It contributes to heart disease, acne, even cancer, much more susceptible to cancer. Depression. A lot of people don't think about sort of the mental health side of what sugar does. It's just all kinds of things. Even as much as we think of sugar as providing some energy, frankly, it can contribute to fatigue because of the highs and the lows of your sugar elevating, your body secreting chemicals to suppress the sugar, up and down, up and down, up and down. Even something as simple as tooth decay, which seems like, okay, that's not that big a deal. Tooth decay, particularly in adults, raises dramatically a person's risk of developing congestive heart failure because the bacteria washes down the back of the throat and gets caught in the eddies, which is where blood pools in and out when the valve pumps blood, and can lead to congestive heart failure. So it's just all around, it's not a great thing. And here's the challenge with sugar. Most scientists that study sugar addiction, sugar attractions, liken it to cocaine in terms of the hold it puts on people, its addictive quality. So quite literally, it is addictive. And if you ever find yourself, if you're not a regular sugar eater and you find yourself over the holidays, you're eating rich, sweet foods, you can find it difficult to stop, go back to your other habits because it just really kind of compounds, and have some sugar, you want some more sugar. And here's the other major issue. It's cheap. Sugar is cheap in most parts of the world. In the States, it's a subsidized crop. So unfortunately, it's super cheap. And so it winds up being a big part of food. And so, I'll give you a prime example. Someone trying to do the right thing to control weight and health will get, say, a no-fat muffin. The problem is that muffin's going to be full of sugar, or even a sugar substitute, which in many cases is even worse. So sugar is an issue. So I've got a few tips, but some of this just is about bringing awareness so that people can really think about this. The first thing you can do is when you're eating, when you're proportioning your food, if you try to think about having your protein before, or at least while eating, and I mean, literally the old advice of don't have your dessert before dinner, that's good advice, right? You want to put something in your stomach, such as a good lean source of protein that's a little more difficult to digest. And so, for example, you might think of this as, say, complex foods. So if you say a candy bar, which has a lot of sugar in it, but let's say your candy bar has some nuts in it. Maybe it's fortified with protein, right? The problem is a candy bar, or even something like a banana, is called a high glycemic food, which means you digest it very rapidly, which causes your blood glucose to rise, exiting the guts, getting into the small intestines, into the bloodstream. And so your glucose levels in your blood rise really rapidly. Now your body tries to produce enough insulin to sequester it, right? It creates this sort of cycle where it actually will take this excess glucose and turn it into fat. And it's yellow fat, not the good fat, the source of energy fat. It's yellow fat, really difficult to get rid of. Well, you can help yourself when you're eating, if you're eating protein first, protein at least mixed in, along with, say, fat. You know, we can't just villainize fat completely. You got to think of things as being a balance, right? So when you eat, sort of the macro definition of your food is carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And you want to make sure that you've got some of that on every plate or a part of every meal that you eat. Now, depending on a person's circumstances, you know, they might have a smaller portion of their protein count percentage-wise being fat or protein or whatever happens to be. But for most people, because of the amount of sugar they're eating, 60, 70, 75% of the calories they're eating are coming from these high refined sugars, which are just driving their glucose up and creating this cycle that's not healthy. In fact, it's often referred to as, say, a metabolic disorder, right? Which is a term that sort of captures just a lot of definitions. If you were to try to eat where no more than 40% of your calories were coming from sugar, choosing complex carbohydrates, say, for example, broccoli. Even if we just say, for the sake of discussion, your portion of broccoli has 40 carbohydrates, grams of carbohydrates, and let's say a small candy bar is 40 grams of carbohydrates. There's a difference, even though the calorie count and the sugar count might be the same. The difference is your body, the way it breaks down the broccoli, including all the fiber and other nutrients that are there that are good for your body. Remember, your body needs those micronutrients for respiration in the cell, right? The mitochondria for energy. Your body will be slow to turn that energy into glucose, breaking it down. And so your blood sugars don't rise as fast. And this is all about controlling how fast they rise. That's really sort of the trick and to think about. And so you can help yourself, even if you're stuck on sugar, you can help yourself by mixing in fat and protein with the meal. Now, we want lean sources of protein, and we like to have polyunsaturated fats. But the bottom line is, the other side of this, when you're talking about digestion, calorie, foods, and weight, if you eat a sugary meal, and I bet everybody listening to us has done this before, they eat a sugary meal. Let's say you had pancakes for breakfast or waffles or whatever that type of thing is, or a pastry even, right? People have a pastry and a coffee on the way to work. They're hungry an hour and a half to 2 hours later because their blood sugar went up, insulin came in and lowered it, and now they're running on empty again. And what do? They go to the snack room at work and probably find another high glycemic carbohydrate, bagel, whatever it happens to be. Even things like chips are that way, even though they have some fat. So it's a bad cycle to get into. And so if you can get the fat and the protein in the meal and find that balance, slow to digest, makes the whole process better. So what I tell people as sort of a tip is, most people have easily accessible sugary or high carbohydrate snacks, chips, crackers, candy, whatever it happens to be. You need to work to do this, but you need to work to have non-sugary, refined sugar snacks available. Got a plan for it. But having nuts, having celery, having things around, even if it's more elaborate and it's a vegetable tray and you've got some dressing and the dressing's a little high in fat, it's still better than the sugar. So what it means is, if you think you've got this problem, you got to decide how committed you are to trying to do something about it. Because the way society is set up and the food that's conveniently available to us in sort of this modern, go-go, fast-paced world we live in, you have to plan. You have to pack your nuts or cheese or other things so that you're not just reaching for the sugar, or at least if you are, you've got something else in the mix to help to control how you digest things. And so these are, there's a term that you see thrown around a lot called life hacks, right? You're trying to figure out these things to have a better life and sort of deal with these kinds of things. That's one of them. And the other side is, if you know you're vulnerable, So for example, I've got my dad all my life has been a sugar fiend. He just loves sugar. He's in his 70s, and he's better than he ever was, but it's harmed his health. You know, it's had a negative impact on his health. Well, I've got a little bit of his appetite for sugar. I enjoy sugar, so I have to really be careful. One, I don't want to keep too much sugar at the house. I mean, there's a little, but I don't want there to be much here, because I might go for it too much, right? So I try to convince Maria, my wife, and it's not difficult to do that. Just let's not buy a lot of sugar, right? Let's not keep those things here. And that doesn't mean on occasion we might not bake a cookies or a pie or whatever, but you got to go to the trouble of making it and then it's gone, right? There's sort of things you can do. So I try to limit the amount of sugar that's around me, but at the same time, I try to make it easy to grab and snack on things like nuts and cheese and other things that will offset my desire, my hunger. But at the same time, if I have some sugar, can slow that digestive process. So that's a really important thing. And so just consider this, right? And anybody watching our show knows I'm not a fan of ultra processed foods. You know, it's just terrible.
And when you said sugar, you mean white sugar or all kind?
Well, I mean white sugar, and then high fructose corn syrup is like white sugar that's been weaponized to damage your body. But sugar in all forms, it's sugar. But if you look at, so for example, if you ate an orange, right, you're going to have some fiber there, and there's going to require the cellulose of the fruit, the structure of it will force your body to take longer to digest it. And it's not going to raise your blood sugar as much as, say, if you had a piece of candy or even drank orange juice. Mm-hmm. So some of this is about educating yourself on what you present to your body in digestion. So apple juice will cause your blood sugars to really spike. And in fact, nobody really needs to be just drinking apple juice, right? Cut apple juice with water or other things so you dilute it some. And that's really true of all fruit juices, because if you ate the apple, no problem. Even if you juice the apple, but then compare juicing the apple to just eating the apple, because of the way you digest it and the fact that now that apple as a whole fruit is not high glycemic, it's a low glycemic food in relative terms, it'll take longer to digest it. So the sugar doesn't have as much of an impact in a negative way on your body. And so, this is, what I'm talking about is a very real issue. So if you look at autopsies from folks that have been in wars, right? This is one of the places where the medical community gets data. It's a tragedy, but there's things to be learned. Even people in their early 30s in the US and Great Britain, where some of this research has really been pinpointed, when they do autopsies and they look at the pancreas, it's about 3 times the size it should be. And unfortunately, that's like an enlarged heart. It's no longer efficient. And that's because it's been overproducing insulin for so long to try to control the sugar in the diet. Well, you consider some of these kids today and the amount of energy drinks and things like they're having, I'm sure that same problem will exist, unfortunately, for that generation. And the body is really sophisticated, and it can handle these things until most people are in their mid-30s. And then there's this cascade of negative impacts, raises their risk of heart disease, cancer, liver toxicity, just all kinds of things, including type 2 diabetes. So it's really something to pay attention to. Now, what are other things you can do besides trying to have some willpower and discipline, right? To try to have alternate snacks available, not expose yourself to too much sugary stuff. Things like CBD oil. And full disclosure, I think most people know we sell CBD products. I'm a massive fan. CBD, because of the balance it brings to the brain, central nervous system, other aspects of the body, can be helpful with breaking addiction patterns. There's very promising research on the ability for CBD to help out with the sort of the depth and the strength of cravings that smokers have when they're trying to quit smoking, or anybody addicted to nicotine in some form or fashion, even heroin addicts. And that's because CBD has been shown to have an impact on stimulating the production of dopamine. And so for somebody that's dealing with withdrawals, that's a big help. That's a big deal. So there's lots to think about here. Remember, packaged food in general is one of the bigger culprits. And then maybe a couple other things to consider is stress. Stress, most people are stress eaters. They eat their feelings, right? And that's something to think about and manage. Things like CBD can be helpful, but if you find yourself really struggling with that, find yourself really eating in ways that just aren't healthy, you're kind of starting a path or a pattern that's not good, get professional help. Not even necessarily for a nutritionist, but perhaps a mental health professional that can help you sort of examine and think through, okay, what's really led to me having to eat to sort of satisfy or deal with something. Of course, we know things like exercise, breathing exercises we just recently spoke about, walking, all those things can have an impact, but it's this is a real issue and a concern. And just like movement, smoking, some of these types of issues, these are major contributors to why people die and develop these high intense risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. So it's something for everybody in the audience to think about. And really today, it's just more about awareness and maybe getting you to think about where you're at on this continuum. Are you managing your interest in sugar, or is it got the best of you? And is now the time to sort of deal with it?
Can we like shift from white sugar to brown sugar or coconut sugar? Because here in Thailand, we have different kind of sugar from nature. Can we shift from white sugar to that?
It would help, but only modestly. So the reason that brown sugar and coconut sugar are somewhat beneficial as opposed to refined white sugar is they maintain some of the mineral complexes that are native to, say, the sugar cane or coconut that can play a role in how insulin, or glucose, I should say, is processed into the cell. And if that process can be a little more efficient, then it can help to manage excess productions of insulin, but not enough. If you just replace all of the sugar in your life from refined white sugar to brown sugar, that's only a subtle thing. It's about controlling the volume of sugar, and perhaps it's changing our palates. So we're looking for a little more savory and not as much sweet. Most people would benefit by trying to make that switch. And where we got so hooked on sugar was food production, food packaging companies. Big food knows that sugar creates addiction, and they want it to, man. They want us to eat those sugary things, so then we want more. It's not satisfying. And so that's sort of led us down this path of where we're at in this modern society.
That is a big issue, because here in Thailand, many kinds of food we eat, we add sugar too, So
right,
not easy to deal with. And besides that, Eddie, I don't eat that much sweets, okay? But I crave for sweets, so I often eat like sweet fruits here, plenty of fruit, mangosteen, rambutans, durian, this kind of stuff. So we have to control this kind of sugar too then.
Yeah, even, I mean, as good as mangosteen or mango can be, there's a lot of nutrients in it, a lot of micronutrients. You can have too much. And so, for people that really want something like that, how about if you take your mango and blend it with ice? You make a slushy, but you've diluted the sugar and the rate of absorption. If you like bread, instead of just white or refined bread, how about buying a really grainy hearth bread that's almost chewy, right? Slows the rate of absorption. So I realize somebody listens and says, well, you're just kind of playing games with yourself. That's true. That's true. You got to develop these secrets, these hacks and things to help you manage these natural desires, because none of us are going to stop having sugar ever. It's just a matter of controlling in such a way it doesn't hurt our health.
For some people, eating is happiness too, So
yes. Eating it can be happiness. There's no question about that. And I enjoy eating. I enjoy the social aspect of it. A couple weeks ago, my son, who doesn't live locally, came home, and my daughter came over, and we sat around the table as a family, and we hadn't done that in a while, and probably sit there for 2 or 3 hours, right? I probably ate too much, but I, associate meals, family meals with a real happiness and satisfaction, but it's also a matter of just kind of controlling that day in and day out.
So I think to control this kind of craving for sugar might take more protein and fat, right?
Absolutely. And things like, so we sell our super green juice, and if you've got an alternative to that, that's great, but it's got enough fiber in it that it also helps to control that rate at which your glucose is going to rise from a high glycemic meal. So even, one of the things that I do to kind of guard my own self is I have a greens juice drink before every meal. It's a habit of mine. It helps me with digestion. It slows that rate of absorption of whatever sugars may be in my meal, particularly if I'm going to have pasta. I love a good fresh made pasta, say with a red sauce, even with a piece of bread. Well, that meal doesn't have a lot of protein. It's got a little protein, and under those circumstances doesn't have a lot of fat. And so I'll have a couple scoops of the green juice, because it accomplishes similarly. It will slow that rate of digestion of that pasta so that it doesn't raise my blood glucose as fast. And so I can kind of enjoy that meal. I consider it a cheat meal, so I can enjoy it without sort of wreaking havoc on my glucose levels.
Okay. Oh, so you also have a protein too, right? That people can drink
do. Yeah, and I love the combination. I don't even need it with anything but water, but I'll have that combination of water and the protein. Now I've really double packed a punch, right? I've got plenty of fiber in there and other things, and so that's just a way for me to know, okay, I can probably go over here and eat a little too much pasta without having that big devastation. And if you want to have, here's a real telltale sign for anybody listening, and we will kind of cut it here, but if you find when you eat that you're tired, say an hour and a half later, there's several things for you to consider. One is your insulin production may be soft, or it may be weak, or your insulin itself may be weak. So you should get checked. If that's a consistent thing, if you're in your 40s and this is constantly happening to you, you should get your blood sugars checked, right? For safety reasons, for good health reasons. But it's also a strong indication that you had too many carbohydrates and not enough fiber, protein, and fat with your meal, because otherwise that shouldn't happen at that same rate of progression.
Okay, that's a good one. Thank you very much, Eddie, for today. So we see you again for many good tips next time, okay?
Thank you, Pari. And this message was definitely not sponsored by the sugar industry.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.